Have you ever wrestled with a gut-wrenching decision in your life? Maybe you're neck deep in one right now. I've certainly been there myself, and we will all undoubtedly be there again.
Marketplace skills are missionary skills.
Following Jesus is a daily trust walk. I've had moments in my life where the Lord was explicit with what He wanted from me. One of those was back in the year 2000 when my wife and I stepped out of the marketplace and into full-time pastoral ministry. I pushed back against God for quite some time. I really didn't like what He was saying, but He was very clearly saying it. He wanted me to leave my job and go on staff at the church. I knew it. I lost sleep. I had trouble eating. I couldn't get my mind right. The book of Jonah plagued me. When Jonah ran from God's clear call, he wasn't the only one that was impacted. He actually created chaos for everyone around him too. The storm hit all of them. And so when a guest pastor and his wife actually sat down on the piano bench with me after a music rehearsal, and they looked right at me and said, "Why are you running from God? You know you're supposed to be here." I finally gave in and took the job. I wasn't going to end up as fish food after all. Sometimes God's desires have been that clear to me, but I've also had seasons where discerning God's will was much more confusing. A few years later, when we transitioned into co-leading a church plant in downtown Indianapolis, we still lived in the suburban outskirts of the city. For 2 years, I wrestled with moving my family into the urban core, away from their school and our extended family. Was that what God was telling me? We were willing to sacrifice, at least I thought we were. And then we would go to the center of the city, look at houses, and I would look at my little kids and I would get sick to my stomach. This just doesn't feel right. I thought you led with your peace, God. But man, we wanted to be obedient to the Lord. So were we supposed to move or stay? I didn't know. We prayed, nothing. And I had this image of God's will as this tightrope that I was frantically trying to stay balanced on, and I was terrified of falling off. What was God's will for this move? I wasn't hearing anything specific, and so I lived in this perpetual paralysis. I begged God to tell me, "What do you want, God? What am I supposed to do? Would you just say it already?" I was in utter turmoil for months until a pastor friend couched my angst into a really interesting analogy. Our house was on a cul-de-sac, and our corner lot had a sizable backyard. As soon as we moved in, we built a nice wooden fence so that our kids and our little runt dog could go out and play without wandering off. They all lived in that backyard during the warm months. My pastor friend asked, "So when your kids go outside, do you tell them, 'Now I want you to swing on the left swing for exactly 4 minutes before building a 3-tiered sandcastle?' I bet you don't. But what do you tell them? Stay in the yard. Stay in the yard." He continued, "Did you ever think that maybe God is okay with whether you live in your current house or in a house downtown? That maybe you're not getting clear instruction right now because He's okay with either. Maybe like you with your kids, He's just saying, 'Erik, I love you. Stay in the yard.'" And that imagery has stuck with me for almost 20 years. Listen, I want to be clear. God is going to ask you to do hard things. I'm not trying to let you off the hook here. Following Jesus requires us to give up the sovereignty over our own lives. And sometimes God will explicitly ask you to make an unthinkable decision that pushes you to the very limits of your faith. When God clearly speaks, we must clearly answer. Obedience is our response to God's grace in our lives. And in every situation, our calling is to keep a posture of yes to Jesus. But I've seen so many people paralyzed like I was about missing some hidden plan that they live in anguish, fear, shame, terrorized by the thought that they might somehow step off the tightrope of God's will and plummet to their death. And if that's you, maybe you need to hear the Father's grace-filled words today. Just stay in the yard. Now listen, sometimes the Lord is specific with his instructions, and sometimes those instructions are hard. Other times, he leaves us the freedom to move within his divine backyard. Worship God, love your neighbor, and make disciples of all nations. When you don't know exactly what God wants you to do, there's your fence post.